importune the government of that country not to let the ship in.
During the Iran-Contragate hearings, voices have been raised which suggest that veils of secrecy have been concealing far more than just arms to Iran or the Contras. A lawsuit has just begun here in the United States, making allegations which strike at the very heart of American democracy. It makes Irangate look like child's play. The investigation claims to have uncovered a secret team of United States military and CIA officials who for 25 years have waged private wars, trafficked in drugs, and assassinated their political enemies on a global scale. These stunning allegations are not being made by federal investigators, but by a group of people of deep religious conviction who fight for social justice in the courtrooms of America. Tonight on Heart of the Matter, we take a look at that organization and what its members do in the name of their faith. Only a short distance from the grandeur of Capitol Hill is the underside of Washington. Its poverty serves as a constant reminder of life beyond the elegant portals of the Citadel. From its offices here, the Christic Institute is mounting its legal assault against the men on the Hill. As a public law firm, Christic is unusual. It is run collectively by people brought together by religious commitment, as well as by a belief in social justice.
In fact, every single program person in the different departments needs to have at least 10 or 20 people, if not more.
Sarah Nelson, the executive director, knows that the case linked to the Contragate scandal is a challenge to the Institute's resources. It will need high energy and high morale.
Is because the project is so big, the goals are so broad beyond the actual litigation itself, that we can't get...
Founded in 1980, the Christic Institute relies not just on legal expertise, but also on public understanding and support. Its members try to prove that specific injustices are symptomatic of deeper threats to the freedom of every American. For them, the Iran-Contragate affair did not begin with Oliver North. Christic's crusade through the courtrooms of America had its beginnings in the Silkwood case. Karen Silkwood was a union organizer at the Kerr-McGee plutonium factory in Oklahoma. When she discovered breaches of safety at the plant, she began compiling a dossier against her employers. It was then that strange events befell her. 8 days before she was due to give her findings to the press, deadly levels of contamination by plutonium were discovered in the bedroom, bathroom, and kitchen of her home. One of the nation's leading radiation experts testified that by this time, Silkwood was already married to cancer. On the night of November the 13th, 1974, Karen was on her way to see a New York Times reporter when she met with an accident. The accident investigator employed by her union said her car was hit from behind and forced to remain on the soft shoulder until it crashed into a concrete bollard. She was killed outright. Her evidence disappeared. The case of Karen Silkwood became a classic instance of David confronting Goliath. It was taken up by the Christic attorney, Danny Sheehan.
I recall at one particular hearing in front of Judge Tice, I was sitting at the table representing the family as their only attorney, and at the other table there were 12 attorneys, including the president of the Oklahoma State Bar Association, the Attorney General of the state of Oklahoma, the city attorney for the state of Oklahoma, for the city of Oklahoma City, and House Counsel for the Kerr-McGee Corporation. There were 12 attorneys for the other side sitting there at the table opposing me.
Lawyers and campaigners fought the case on behalf of Karen's 3 children. They won substantial damages against the Kerr-McGee Corporation for its negligence.
I just think it's wonderful, and I'm finally glad that they've got Karen's name clear. She was only trying to get those people get a clean plan.
But for Christic, It was a victory with wider implications.
This means that the whole ballgame has changed, that now there's absolute and strict liability for any and all contaminations that escape those facilities.
Coming together to work on the Silkwood case was a turning point for the lawyers, investigators and activists. It was such a powerful experience that it triggered the creation of the Christic Institute as a committed, interfaith law firm.
We'll be talking about the political implications of this lawsuit, not just the suit itself.
The special quality of Christic's brief has attracted an unusual workforce, from a former member of the CIA to a Jesuit priest who is also an investigator, Father Bill Davis.
I have personally always been very concerned and committed to social justice issues, and I see the struggle for justice as very much of a religious issue. In general, whether it's liberation theology in the Third World or whether it's the post-Vatican Catholic Church or the mainline Protestant groups, it seems to me that there is a great trend now toward seeing how our religious roots can help us be involved in the struggle for justice and to really bring our religious roots to the struggle for change, which is really where, I mean, if you want it in traditional terms, it's really where the struggle of sin and redemption takes place.
That struggle led them south to the events which took place in Greensboro, North Carolina. Anti-racists and communists held a rally which was a direct challenge to the Ku Klux Klan in its southern stronghold. They dared the Klan to attend, and it did. Klan members and neo-Nazis arrived in carloads. Taking out their guns in full view of local television cameras, they opened fire on the demonstrators. They then drove off. 5 people, black and white, lay dying on the ground.
We're on the hook of the damn cop! We don't want the cop!
The police had offered no protection.
Help us! Help us! Help us! Oh, this is getting the ambulance. Get him right here.
At the first trial in the federal court, before an all-white jury, the Klan members and neo-Nazis were unanimously acquitted. At a second state trial, again before an all-white jury, the defendants were again acquitted. The verdict seemed to run directly in the face of the evidence. People were stunned at the result.
These were U.S. citizens who were gunned down. It was in broad daylight with television cameras looking on. 5 people were killed, a number were wounded, and no one went to jail because of that. No one was convicted of murder or any kind of wrongful death, either in a federal trial or later in a state trial. So we felt it very important to go in and to do a civil suit. As citizens, we can bring a citizen's action in civil court in order to get some justice for the survivors and for the family.
Christic took on the Ku Klux Klan on behalf of the victims' families, and won. Those responsible may have escaped conviction for murder, but 6 years later, in an unprecedented judgment against the Klan and the American Nazi Party, the relatives were awarded damages. One of the successful plaintiffs was Dale Sampson, whose husband had been killed.
We were there for the truth about what happened in Greensboro, because the truth, in a sense, was, as a plaintiff, the truth was the only revenge that I could have. Not revenge in a vindictive sense, but a sense of some closure on what had happened and some justice for the American people as well as myself. But I think the main thing and the main reason we went to the Christic was because we knew that about them, that they were very concerned for and would work day and night for the truth. And that's what we needed more than anything else.
That was important, but much more important was, to us, was the need to reveal the abuse of power here and the way the media is domesticated and cowed so that it didn't really dig into what was at stake here, what was going on. And fortunately, we were able to win the case. We showed that it was not only the Ku Klux Klan and the Nazi Party that were involved, but the local police. For the first time, those who have been abused by police power began to realize that they don't have to be servile to that there is something that they can do if they get organized and creatively use the structures that we have, such as the judicial system.
I shudder to think about what it would have been like without the Christic Institute, without the morality that they brought to it, without the concern, without the expertise, without the resources, without giving us one of their staff full time. And I just think that there's no, at this point in time in the United States, the Christic Institute is a very unique organization that combines its belief with their know-how and their willingness to work with people on the cutting edge of struggle in this country.
The weapon Christic uses is the law. Although a mighty sword, it can be unwieldy, especially when Christic does not have at its disposal the resources of its legal opponents. From the plush offices of an established Washington law firm, a successful lawyer can earn $400,000 in a year. At the two dilapidated tenements which house the Christic Institute, conditions are rather different. Floor space is at a premium, the files are in boxes, and lawyers take home $12,000 in a year. Danny Sheehan has a low opinion of his profession. Aren't other lawyers informed by their beliefs?
No, I don't think that lawyers are informed by religion. They're informed by money. That's what they're in the court for, is to maximize their profits. That's why they'll represent anybody who will pay them.
You can't be the only person who's a religious man who's also a lawyer.
Oh, no. But the point is that they separate themselves totally from their religious being in their professional life, like most everyone does. And they say that, well, I'm defending this professional heroin seller and mass murderer who orders the shotgun killing of people who won't pay up on their protection money, but it isn't because I like them or anything else. It's just my job under the legal system. There are other men and women who are lawyers around the country that will do that as long as the pay is adequate. I won't do that. I happen to see my constituency as the people who believe in the Judeo-Christian ethic, and they don't have to hire me. We'll raise the money to cover the costs.
I get a little bit troubled about certain organizations, such as Christic. Christic has a nice name that sounds terribly innocuous. It bills itself as a non-profit organization supported by foundations, churches, and private donations. I'd like to know a little bit more about it than is in the public domain. I'd like to see who are some of those private donors, who are some of the foundations.
You're not suggesting they're funded by Kremlin gold, are you?
I'm not suggesting that they're necessarily funded by Kremlin gold, but I'm certainly not ruling out the fact that many people in Christic, for example, are very close to the Cubans. It would not surprise me in the slightest if there were not some Cuban Directorate of Intelligence Information, Director General of Information money, which through suitable conduits had been funded in to support Christic to some of these private individuals. I mean, this, in the real world, whenever you see umbrella groups like this waging this kind of political action, very seldom do all of their funds come from totally the sort of innocent public parties that they advertise. And particularly a group of this nature, I would want to know a lot more about. Whenever there's a spontaneous demonstration against, say, the deployment of Pershings in Europe, I always want to know who paid for the buses.
Christic publishes accounts to show who pays for its buses. Its funders include private foundations, religious groups like the United Methodists, the Unitarians, or the Sisters of Mercy, and Jewish contributors. Its sponsors show its special character.
So we're not an ordinary law firm. We aren't in this for the money. We're not in it for the prestige. We're in it so that the truth may appear. And I think that really does give us a certain bottom line edge. The truth really does have a certain power.
And that power is fueled by their faith. Danny Sheehan trained briefly as a Jesuit before studying law at Harvard. His courtroom successes read like a list of famous American trials. They include the Pentagon Papers, Wounded Knee and Attica, as well as Silkwood and Greensboro. He married Sarah Nelson, who was the power and the figurehead in the Silkwood campaign. Their marriage consolidated their commitment to the ideals of Christic. The Institute is not a denominational organization, but for the Sheehans, Catholicism is at the center of their family life and their political practice.
My moral authority comes primarily from the basic Judeo-Christian ethical norms that are written about, talked about, discussed all the time. You can hear about them in any temple on Saturday or in any church almost on Sunday. The fact is that we just happen to take them seriously. The Native Americans that we used to work with used to laugh about how Americans and Anglo-Saxons always do their religion on one day. And for the other 6 days out of the week, they don't have anything to do with it at all. All we do is try to keep those values that we hear about on Saturday and Sunday every day. Doesn't make us self-righteous, doesn't make us better than everybody else, just makes us different.
It's the Christic's particular blend of religion and politics which troubles Kent Hill of the Institute of Religion and Democracy.
The fundamental task of the Church, in fact, is not to be primarily involved in politics at all. But when you get into a situation where church groups seem to exist primarily to further a particular political agenda, and that doesn't matter if it's the left, the right, the middle, whatever, if that is their primary reason for existence, then they have betrayed their fundamental mission, which is to be a kind of source of salt in society, which deals with the fundamental questions about the relationships between human beings and their creator.
If religion has no role in politics, that is, using politics in the broad sense, then one has to ask oneself, well, what is religion? Is it merely, somehow to be confined to the antiseptic atmosphere of stained glass windows, sort of a gentleman's club with holy water? I mean, who needs it?
For church groups to allow themselves to get attracted off or deflected off into these other activities, particularly when they're such questionable ones, I think will destroy the credibility of the church. It will not only mean that the church is not a force for advancing social justice in this world, it will mean that the church will discredit itself as a legitimate Christian apologist for its beliefs. People simply will not listen to the church when it is identified with politics which are very extreme and very questionable.
Some of the strongest criticisms of Christic have come because of its involvement in the sanctuary movement. The treacherous journey across the river from El Salvador and thereafter on to the United States is a lifeline for people seeking political asylum. But border patrols and aerial lookouts police it. The refugees are entering illegally. They are rounded up and sent back.
In the name of the Father.
In an attempt to thwart this process, the sanctuary movement, supported by many churches, aids the passage of refugees and provides them with shelter.
Churches do not smuggle people, people smuggle people. If you smuggle anybody through Del Rio, you're going to see the United States magistrate.
Christic came to the aid of a lay Methodist, Stacy Merkt, who was arrested and charged with smuggling 4 refugees into the United States.
These people are always referred to as illegal aliens, as though they were some kind of little green Martians. As a matter of fact, they're political refugees, as any reasonable person would admit, looking at the conditions in El Salvador or Guatemala. And our own law is very clear that people who are fleeing with a well-founded fear of persecution have a right to come here to this country, to have a right to seek asylum in this country. So both by U.S. law and international law, I would say that they have a legal right to be here. But the important thing is that she was charged under criminal statutes in the U.S. And so we went down to do her legal defense because, again, we thought there was a much broader issue there, and that is our whole Central American policy, our refusal to deal with the consequences of what has been a rather consistent policy over the years in Central and South America.
The allegation against Christic relative to sanctuary is simply that it is a political platform on which to attack American foreign policy. It is based on exaggerated claims about the situation in El Salvador. It is primarily motivated by political rather than humanitarian concerns. And for the church to be involved in something that is not clearly humanitarian and non-political and non-partisan is very questionable.
Investigating the sanctuary movement led the Christic Institute into murkier waters and the La Penca bombing. On the 30th of May, 1984, at a hideout in La Penca, Nicaragua, Eden Pastora holds a press conference for international journalists. He denounces a rival contrafaction, which he claims is a puppet of the CIA.
Y dentro de la alianza hay sectores de derecha, dentro del MDN, y dentro del MDN hay sectores
de más derecha. The bomb's target, Pastora, survives, but 17 others are wounded and 3 journalists are killed. An American reporter, Martha Honey, looks on as her husband, Tony Avergan, is seriously injured.
Certainly, Martha and I are basically concerned with bringing the people that did the La Penca bombing to justice, and that's our goal. We also, as journalists, feel it's important to have the truth brought to light.
The 2 journalists came to believe they had uncovered a CIA plot. For help, they turned to Christic.
We heard about the Christic Institute, and we called them, and they said, "Oh, we're so glad you called. We were just about to call you as well. We have to get together." And they have been looking at a network of people that they began calling the SECORD team, which was a network of ex-CIA people and ex-generals who were running their own vision of U.S. foreign policy. And in the course of that investigation, they turned up evidence about the La Penca bombing. And when we put our information together with their information, it fit together perfectly. We had found a lot of the same things, and it was the 2 halves of a puzzle. They have been looking at the group from the top down, and we have been looking at the same group from the bottom up.
Their investigation has touched on somebody's raw nerve. They have received threats of reprisals if they continue with their claims.
This has taken a toll. It's meant that our kids have lost some friends. It's meant that people around us have had their people working for us, our secretary and so on, have had their families harassed and their lives disrupted. A number of our sources have suffered in various ways. I mean, in some cases very badly because of this. And it's meant that essentially we realize that our house is bugged, our phones are bugged, we have no privacy. I mean, we know everything that goes on here is heard. And so, we really have no private life anymore.
Tony Avergan and Martha Honey claim that within the Contragate scandal, they are able to establish the cocaine link, in which Colombian cocaine, imported into the United States, paid for arms to the Contras. Behind this, they allege, was a network of CIA officials and American businessmen. They identified John Hull as a central figure in the plot to kill Pastora. They say it was his airstrip in Costa Rica that was used to smuggle weapons and cocaine between the United States and Central America.
We actually have sworn testimony from pilots who flew arms for the Central Intelligence Agency to Costa Rica and then had their planes loaded up with cocaine and flew back to the United States. And one of them even says he landed at a United States Air Force base to unload his drugs.
Amongst the 29 people charged in the lawsuit brought by the Christic Institute are Theodore Shackley, a former CIA chief, his colleague Thomas Kleins, and a former general, Richard SECORD. As well as alleging responsibility for the La Penca bombing, the central affidavit in the action alleges 25 years of covert activity by this secret team. It includes criminal activity on a global scale, drug trafficking, arms dealing, and assassination.
If the allegations were true, then you could argue about acceptability. But one of the things that troubles me about the lawsuit is that it is a very broad brush, kitchen sink, stop the world, I want to get off because I don't like what you're doing lawsuit, where there are 29 defendants. It's a conspiracy theory run riot. They go way back to 15, 20 years and say, well, the same group of people did this in Laos, they did this in Vietnam, they did this in Africa, they're doing this in Central America, they're all dreadful, what they're doing must be illegal, we're going to file a civil suit, therefore, under the Racketeer Influences and Corrupt Practices Act, and bring them all to account. Well, I'm not denigrating the motives of many people in the Christic Institute, but I think that this is not the way to register political dissent and political disapproval.
To sit there and watch the people who have admitted to lying and shredding documents, in shipping weapons of death all across the world, and what we'll prove is shipping cocaine by the tonnage into this country, to the young people of this country, because the Congress won't fund them, and they need some source of funding. To have those types of people thinking that they're standing for America in the rest of the world. And it's the only way that they can promote democracy is by sneaking around in the back alleys of the world and assassinating people and poisoning people with narcotics, because they need to have the alliance with the narcotic smugglers, because they need their secret money, because Congress won't fund them. Irresponsible Congress that it is, from their point of view. That we don't need these people to represent us any longer.
If you disapprove of my politics to try to take me into court and charge me with a criminal activity, if that precedent is allowed to stand and grow, that is, to me, terribly corrosive of political life and democracy.
But it's not someone's politics that are being taken to court, it's someone's criminal activity that's being taken to court.
The motivation for this suit is a distaste for the perceived or alleged politics of the defendants.
But the allegations
and
are
the allegation is that these people who are pursuing courses of action and policies of which we fundamentally disapprove are doing them in an illicit way. Now, again, you are talking about policies which have, by and large, been vindicated at the ballot box. And one thing that troubles me, it comes increasingly over the last decade. More and more people in our democratic polity, when they can't win at the ballot box, they try to win at the courtroom. And I detest, as I have said a couple of times, the attempt to criminalize what are actually differences over policy and differences over what line of action a government should pursue. Having differences of opinion is something that is every citizen's right. A democracy such as Great Britain's and ours works on differences of opinion, but saying that someone who disagrees with you, who tries to pursue an action of which you do not approve, must somehow be breaking some law in the process. Therefore, I'll scurry around and see if I can find out what law he's breaking and try to sue him under criminal statute, strikes me as a gross perversion of the political process.
Well, as you're no doubt aware,
However, the Contgate hearings are not about fiddling expenses or minor transgressions.
Have been sued in federal court in Florida for a vast array of alleged illegal and corrupt practices beginning as far back as 1960s. Did you know about that?
Of course I know about it.
Well, the allegations include the organization of assassination program funded by the drug kingpin in Laos and laundering of millions of dollars skimmed from sale of military weapons to the Shah of Iran, and they've got the provision of military services to Somoza and laundering Colombian drug money. But anyhow, would you tell the committee...
The Christic lawsuit featured, albeit briefly, as General SECORD testified in the congressional hearings.
And describe your involvements in transactions with them.
Can I comment on this suit? This suit, which was filed in May of last year, is the most outrageous fairy tale that anybody's ever read. Nobody, including the Justice Department, credits it at all. It's being dealt with. I can only fight on so many fronts at once. I regard that one as a rather minor threat, which will be tossed out of court shortly.
But he thought it important enough to employ another former CIA man to find material which might discredit Christic or the plaintiffs.
And I gather from conversations that you had with our staff that he wanted you to also find out unfavorable information about any of these individuals that might have been making accusations.
Something that ultimately I would put together and be given to him and to General SECORD's attorney for subsequent use in a lawsuit.
Did you use the informal term that you wanted you to find out any dirt about them, or that you were trying to find out any dirt about them if you could?
Well, I used derogatory, but dirt is...
From within the fortress of Marion Federal Penitentiary comes interesting support for Christic's allegations. Imprisoned in 1982 for arms dealing, Edwin Wilson may not seem a trustworthy witness, but this ex-CIA man now admits to being one of the secret team, which stands indicted. He wants to unburden himself of damaging information.
I would like to have the story get out, which is the truth. You know, there's been such a massive cover-up on this whole group, the group that now is running the war for the Contras, that I felt the only way I could somewhat justify my own actions was to have the truth come out.
Are you saying that Iran-Contra is just the tip of the iceberg?
Just the tip of the iceberg.
We've asserted that they have this major enterprise, which is going down secretly and clandestinely to supply the Contras in violation of the United States Neutrality Act. That's been proven. See, we said it almost a year before anybody else wanted to admit it. We also demonstrated that this group was being supported into the highest levels of the National Security Council. Oliver North, Rob Owen, we named the people. We told the exact role that they played. You know, the fact is that's been proven. You know, the fact of the matter is that there are some evil things that are done by the human family. They're planned, and they're done in secret and in the dark. And the fact is that what we've done is we've exposed that. That's all we've done. And the fact of the matter is that there's more to be exposed, and we're in the process of exposing the rest of it.
This is by far the most important case we've ever done. I think both for the kinds of forces that we're up against, as well as for the broader public policy implications. If this crowd can get away with what they have been getting away with, you know, the arms dealing, the drug dealing, the assassination programs, and sell it under the guise of some kind of blind anti-communism, having had the revelations that we've had, the Hassenfuss flight, the Iran arms deal, if they still get away with it, then I think democracy, at least in this country, is in very, very serious condition. I don't think it will survive. We're either going to win against these forces this time, or I am not optimistic about the survival of democracy in this country. I think it's that serious.
We do not have, and we're never intended to have, a participatory democracy. We have a republic. The whole concept on which our republic is constructed is that you elect people to look after public affairs, and then at stated times you judge them on how they have looked after your interest in conducting those affairs, some of which have to be conducted in secret. And if you don't like their stewardship of your interest and the way they've taken custodial charge of it, you toss them out and get someone else. But the notion that people have a right to vote on every policy decision before it is made is a notion without constitutional warrant whatsoever. You will not find the word democracy anywhere in the Constitution of the United States, nor will you find any reference to the people's right to know.
Danny Sheehan is intent on letting the people know. But is he optimistic about succeeding?
I'm totally optimistic that we're going to win. It's a simple question of how much of it we're going to win and against how many of these people. I'm confident at this time that all 29 of those men will be in federal prison when this thing is over.
Whatever the outcome, in its unique way, Christic will continue to fight for the soul of America.
The simple fact is that we're proud at the Christic Institute. If there comes a point in time when being part of the Judeo-Christian community is made against the law, like it was in Rome back in the first century, or as it was in Germany in the 1930s, we want there to at least be enough evidence against the people at the Christic Institute as Jews and Christians to at least indict us. And we assume that there'll be enough to convict us. Clear and convincing evidence that that's who we are.